It is a pleasure to have Kayla Matheus join us today. Welcome, Kayla. So Kayla just moved here about a week ago. She's a Boston native, but she's been hanging in New York City, working on her startup. We're going to spend a lot of time talking about her startup, but I first wanted to introduce you to her and get to know her background and how she came to be the founder and CEO of Moti, okay? So this morning we talked a lot about the importance of the why, the sense of purpose, and that any great entrepreneurial innovation venture is led by people with purpose. Now, you went to Yale. You have a left brain, right brain balance, right? A little mechanical engineering, a little art and architecture, right?
Yep.
So what was it that you thought you might want to do when you went to Yale that led you to pursue this rather unique hybrid degree?
So one of the reasons that I picked Yale, it was my top choice, was because it had an architecture program. The funny thing, though, is that I didn't end up majoring in architecture. I learned pretty quickly that I didn't actually want to be an architect. In talking to a lot of them in their careers, it was a lot of paperwork, a lot of constraints, and you know, only if you were the best of the best did you get any recognition and get to do what you want.
Right.
I also realized very quickly that my favorite part of architecture was building the models. So when I was in high school, I actually took an architecture class, and my parents fondly remember me just taking over the entire dining room table with foam, with X-Acto knives, and hot glue. So I realized that I actually really like things in more of the handheld space. So the parts that I loved about architecture was the creative thinking, the brainstorming, the coming up with new things, but also the building and the execution. And when I was trying to decide what to major in at Yale, I had this kind of crisis about, I thought I wanted to do architecture, but maybe not, because I was also taking a graphic design course at the time and completely fell in love with that way of thought. I never in a million years thought I would be either an art major or an engineering major. I remember my mother in high school telling me, like, you should look into engineering, and I had no idea what it was, but immediately, because she said it, I immediately didn't like it.
Yeah.
It wasn't until I became a little bit more mature when I was in college that I took also an intro to Mechie course and fell in love with that.
Yeah.
And the reason why was because I learned how to use a machine shop, I learned how to use a laser cutter, all these rapid prototyping techniques, and build, again, these little devices that could do some stuff. So I went and I talked to the director of architecture saying, hey, this is what I'm thinking about, this is where I'm at. And she immediately said, you should definitely do the double major, major in architecture. So coming from her, I received kind of that validation, because even if I wanted to do architecture, what makes you stand out when you're going to apply to a accredited master's program, you know, everyone's going to apply having been an architecture undergrad, but if you can come in with this unique stance, you actually have an advantage. And that's been true in the entirety of the rest of my career, is having this dual background.
Career, right? Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
Having this dual background has opened so many doors for me in the future, because it is so unique.
All right. So let's talk about your long career so far. Now, I know it's often improper and impolite in society to say the age of a woman, but since you volunteered it, you are 25 years old.
Yes, I am.
Okay. So let's talk about this career of yours so far. So what did you do when you left Yale? What was sort of the initial experience?
So the funny thing with my career is I haven't done any one thing for more than a year at a time since graduating. So when I first left Yale, I actually stayed at Yale.
Right.
I had become close with an ME professor of mine who was also interested in design. I discovered industrial design on my own. I actually convinced Yale to give me money to travel around Europe during the summer to study and just read a bunch of books and go to museums about design, because they didn't have a design program. And I said, hey, I know I'm interested in this, you don't have the resources, go send me here. And it did, it was wonderful. So I started to get really involved in the theory. And I found this professor who had worked at Segway, he now works at Apple actually, who was also integrated with this design and engineering. So together we worked to bring to what's called the Yale Center for Engineering, Innovation, and Design. So brand new center, we took over the Yale Engineering Library, put in shops, workspaces, whiteboards, and I helped to define a new curriculum to integrate design more into the engineering school, as well as choosing like what goes in the space, what's our mission, what are our values, really diving deeper and putting together, again, that design and engineering. So I spent a year doing that. At the same time, this is when I started to involve myself in a group called Design for America.
Cool.
So I helped lead and bring a Design for America studio to Yale, and what DFA for short is, it's a network, it's like an umbrella network of studios at colleges and universities across the country that helps bring design thinking and human-centered design to college students. So these students, either undergrad, graduate students, any type of major, they'll be working on design projects that are local and social. So meaning that they'll go out into their communities, they'll do research, these are projects that are related to health, to education, economics, whatnot, but could be a physical product, could be a visual project, but ultimately we're using design methods to solve that.
And through that program, we have a very good joint friend, a woman who has a huge why. Her name is Hannah Chung. Hannah is a South Korean American woman who went to Northwestern University and very much like Kayla, although she's an engineer, fell in love with the process of industrial design. And she had an experience where her grandfather died in his sleep of diabetes in South Korea, and it gave her her life's why. And at some point later in the class, I'm going to share her story with you. She's created a personal robot in the form of a teddy bear that has been used to help families with children with type 1 diabetes cope. And it's become a platform now where they're targeting other chronic diseases like allergies and asthma and things of that nature. So again, industrial design, we've talked about design thinking as the entry point into understanding challenges and problems and approaching it in a far more human-centric way to get to that real high level of value. So you were an early pioneer in sort of the evangelizing of design around Design for America. And
Yes.
that's where you got to meet Hannah for the first time.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So part of bringing together the Yale Center for Engineering, Innovation, and Design was to integrate and bring DFA to Yale's campus. So I founded the studio there, and through that I got to know headquarters, which was very early on when they were just kind of starting to expand nationally.
Yeah.
And they invited me to come and be a fellow. So for the next year I joined, I basically taught and mentored this process across the country. I also was at Northwestern, which is where their headquarters are, and was teaching design thinking to their freshman engineers. Northwestern is definitely really, really good at integrating design with engineering very early on and bringing more of those soft skills in addition to the hard skills.
And so for those of you who don't know, Northwestern is a school north of Chicago. You know, very, very strong national university reputation. So you had a chance to find your way, right? Sort of you converged on it from these two different endpoints.
Yeah.
And it led to you to kind of find your purpose, right? And now you left, so you were working at Yale, you helped establish this awesome center, you became an evangelist for DFA at Northwestern, and then you took on your first traditional role, would you say?
Somewhat, yeah.
Yeah.
So I realized very quickly that it was great to spend these 2 years in design education. I really firmed up my theory, my beliefs on design, but I was itching to take that theory into practice and get out of academia and really into industry. So what I did is I left DFA. I went and did a little bit of freelance with a firm called Altitude in Boston. So it was a little bit more on the mechy side, got back to building things and realizing that was really, really at my core. One thing I missed with the education part of my career was that I wasn't building stuff. You know, but this was freelancing. I wanted a more full-time position, and then ended up taking a job at SC Johnson. So opposite, huge corporation in Racine, Wisconsin. Went back to Chicago and
Fast-moving
worked there.
consumer goods primarily.
Yes.
Right? Yeah.
And so my role there was mainly to come in and bring this creative design thought earlier on into the product development process. So I was really, you know, most of my teams, it was me as the only young person, female designer type in a group of older male engineers. And I was here to bring this radical new type of thinking to them. It was also in the middle of the Midwest, so like everyone had been at their same job for 20 years, whereas I had been jumping all over the place and very stereotypically millennial, doesn't like to sit still.
Do they have the iPhone in the Midwest yet?
Oh yes, they do. It's just the, you know, version 4.
Okay, there you go. All right, so you did that for a while. That's a pretty radical cultural change for a person of your background.
And the reason that I actually took the job is I knew coming into it, it wasn't going to be my idealized job. You know, I wanted to work at IDEO or Frog and someplace sexy. But I was basically headhunted by my manager, and he is a brilliant man. Very much a design thinker. He's a design director at SCJ, and always really believed in me. And and was always my #1 cheerleader, and knew that I could bring this unique spin to a more traditional company. Now that said, I only spent 6 months at SC Johnson because I was given the amazing opportunity to then move to New York with 30 weeks.
So explain, so we've talked a lot about accelerators, right? So 30 weeks is a very unique accelerator, right? Because it's a design-centric accelerator. So tell everybody what the unique angle is of 30 weeks compared to your traditional accelerator.
So I would call 30 weeks a pre-accelerator. And this past year was the first year they were doing it, and they, being Google, it came out of the creative lab, and they partnered with Piper Island and a couple of design schools in the New York area. What it was a 7-month-long program where I was one of 16 designers who were chosen, not because we had this amazing idea and team and funding and all this stuff ready to go, but based off of our portfolios and our past work and our desire to become entrepreneurs. So we came in with nothing. So no idea, no team, no money, except for this passion and this sense of design. So from Google's perspective, the whole program's point was to say, hey, we've got a lot of tech people starting companies, we've got a lot of business people starting companies, but where are the designers? Because if you look at the most successful startups out there, they're taking design into account from day one. And as designers, we're very good at understanding that user experience, problem finding, crafting of user-centric solutions. So that was the whole idea behind it.
And let me just reiterate, if you forget what I said yesterday, because that was a long time ago. The co-founders of Airbnb are designers. The co-founder of Pinterest is a designer. Right? When you build communities, it's about the human experience, and nobody gets the human experience better than a designer. So there's a very, very new trend in business where designers are now given far more responsibility. They used to keep them in the back room until they had, or bring them in way too late in the process. But now they're front and center.
Yep.
So this is a very pioneering effort, right? And was it everything you had hoped it would be? The 30 weeks?
Yes and no.
Okay.
So the great thing about 30 weeks was that it gave someone like me who was used to having some stability in her career, even though I was jumping all over the place, and someone who is normally kind of financially conservative, legitimacy to go and take these 7 months and just explore my passions and what I want to do and make out of my career. And also having the Google names behind me was really, really helpful in terms of legitimizing myself in the startup community. Because right now, I'd say that starting a startup, especially in this area, and even starting in the East Coast as well, joining or founding a startup is kind of like joining a band from when the 70s or the 80s. It's the cool thing to do now. So I know so many people who are starting startups just to start a startup, and then being able to have some sort of edge or element of legitimacy was really, really helpful in doing so.
Cool. So you created the idea of Moti as you sort of worked your way through this 30 weeks process. Where did the light bulb go off for you? What was it that you said, this is my mission?
Yeah.
How did you get there?
So the funny thing is that Moti wasn't the only thing I started off working on, and this was before Moti was even Moti. So being a designer, I came into this 30 weeks program saying, okay, here are some problems that I'm interested in, and most of these problems were things that were personal to me. So the two front runners that I was working on for the first couple of months was about habit formation. So this stemmed from my own inability to form a very specific habit that could highly affect my quality of life. I tore my ACL in high school. I've been in and out of physical therapy for over a decade by now. It's never really worked, and I've struggled with pain and weakness, etc. And I had the realization maybe about a year ago that the reason this might not be working is because I could never get into the routine at home. And this is literally just like 20 minutes a day. I had the right tools. I knew exactly what to do. Theoretically, I could watch Netflix for 20 minutes less a day when I got home from work. There was no legitimate reason in my mind why I shouldn't be doing this. Instead, it was more some sort of psychological block. So this was the impetus behind, hey, I'm struggling with habit formation. Talking to my friends and reading about this, most human beings struggle with habit formation. So let's dig into there. Now, the other one that I was working on was totally different. So it was about early detection of breast cancer in young women. So my mother had breast cancer in her 30s while I was in high school, so very young. And I've personally tried to figure out how to best tackle this for myself and gain early access to diagnostic tools, and found a lot of blockers just because statistically speaking, from larger health companies, it makes more sense to them to not have you get access to mammograms and other types of things until you're later on in life. So what do you do at that moment that I found a lot of other young women actually have, of like, you feel something and it just doesn't feel right, but you tell yourself, hey, statistically speaking, like, I'm too young for this, or B, I'm too busy to make a doctor's appointment, and C, the health insurance companies and whatnot, they don't actually also believe it's an issue for me. So that's what I was starting to tackle as well. So both of these polar opposite things.
Yeah.
And at some point I had to make a decision, which one am I going to go with? And the funny thing is that everyone around me, my mentors, my fellow designers in the program, they all wanted me to go with the latter, with the breast cancer protection. It was more thought out. It was a very simple solution that I was proposing. People get it. I ended up, of course, not choosing that one and going with Moti.
You have a real authority problem.
Apparently. Didn't think about that until now. And the reason was, so you're asking about this light bulb.
Yeah.
And with Moti, what I did, I knew about this problem. The first thing I did was read about the science behind it. So what are the brain mechanisms going on in place? And I realized that, hey, there's actually research on this. And there are very, very simple models and methodologies that make habit formation work a lot better. The problem is no one really uses them or knows about them, and our solutions aren't taking them into account at a deep enough level. So that was one issue. And then, of course, in addition to the science, I wanted to start immediately going to user research. So once I knew this problem, I grabbed 5 of my fellow 30 Weeks designers, followed them for a month. They either wanted to form or break a habit at that point. And essentially, through interviews and surveys and talking to them, had these different weeks of interventions, one with just cold turkey, one with existing apps on the market, and then another with these physical, low-fidelity prototypes that I'll show you a bit later.
Yeah, and anytime you're ready, you want to dive into the slides now, because I think we're ready for that transition whenever you're comfortable.
Cool.
So, okay.
Yeah, and so that was the aha moment when I saw with the users, even with these really low-fidelity prototypes, there was a particular one that you'll see that really tripped off that light bulb of, hey, there's something here. So it was really through the combination of reading about the science and noticing these gaps in the market, but also with the user research and some really, really early testing. So through those two things, it gave me enough validation, and also the realization that, as you probably noticed through my past career history and transitions and what I did in college, I loved working with my hands. And Moti was going to allow me to work on a physical product that was exactly the type of thing that I wanted to be working on.
Cool. So that being said, please take the floor. Take
Yep,
us through
sounds
your day.
good.
Okay, cool. Awesome. You can do that. That's your water, right?
Yes, it is. Okay.
Cool.
So first what I'm going to do is just tell you what Moti is and what it does very briefly so that you have some context. And then we'll rewind and basically say, how did I get there from day one? So what Moti is a personable smart object that helps you build any habit you desire. So we all, I'm willing to bet everyone in this room has some sort of habit that they want to form, whether it's exercising more, going to bed earlier, flossing your teeth, making your bed, practicing guitar, whatever. The issue that we're dealing with is how difficult it is. I know this from experience and from looking at the science. You guys probably also have had issues with habit formation. But if you look at a particular statistic here from New Year's resolutions, which is the best analogy that we've got for habit formation, since there isn't too much research on it, is that 80% of Americans who attempt New Year's resolutions each year fail. So that's pretty dismal. I'm definitely one of them. And like I mentioned before, the other problem is with our current solutions. So if you look at wearables and mobile apps, they're extremely popular. Over 1 in 10 Americans owns a wearable these days. And there's over 800 habit-related apps in the App Store now. The problem is that they really focus just on numbers and tracking, and that alone is not enough for motivation and long-term engagement. So you can look at research on drop-off rates with wearables, and they're very quickly left on the shelf. With mobile apps, they share this fatal flaw of being stuck on your phone. So they're out of sight, out of mind, and even if you're getting push notifications, they're at the wrong time and they're not actionable. They're either going to be completely ignored or, on the flip side, get way too annoying. So I had a user in one of my early case studies delete one of the apps I made him use because it got too annoying. So instead, Moti is totally different. So Moti is about understanding how we as humans emotionally connect with technology. And the way we're doing that is by taking those specific insights from behavioral science, things like environmental cues, habit loop theory, immediate and variable rewards, but also looking at the social robotics, and this is where the emotional part comes in. So how do we as humans connect with technology over the long term? Plus taking a look at what are the learnings that we can take from the current quantified self-management. So I'll talk about this guy, one of the Motis, that kind of how it works, which is very, very deceivingly simple. So Moti's first feature is its physicality. It becomes that environmental cue, so one glance at it and you're immediately reminded of your habit in a non-intrusive way. And then when you do your habit, you get to interact with Moti through the push button in order to celebrate your small win through lights, sounds, and haptics. So it's this immediate and tangible reward that's extremely Pavlovian, extremely simple, but very powerful psychologically. And then Moti is also smart, so he's Wi-Fi connected, which means we're always doing analytics on the back end about where you are in your habit progression. So if you're trending upwards over time, Moti celebrations are going to evolve, kind of like a Tamagotchi growing up over time as well. So you'll be able to gauge where you are, like from the interactions just with the device, in addition to the numerical elements. Now the flip side, so Moti knows when to expect during the day that you're going to do your habit.
Oops.
And if you are straying from that, Moti might get sad, as you just saw, or angry, or just stay purely encouraging. And we've also got an online portal, so people who do need those numbers can go and look at their analytics deeper on, and also customize it to different settings. But the big question that I want to address now is how did we get here, which I alluded to a little bit already. So these are those first super low fidelity prototypes that I mentioned. So that goes to 5.
And so just for everybody's benefit, right, we've used the phrase MVP, minimum viable product, right? What's the least amount of functionality required to validate your value proposition? Minimum viable product. Low fidelity is just a very simple prototype. So low fidelity versus medium versus high fidelity, a very simple prototype, okay? Very rough,
Yep.
just to get the idea in people's hands.
So I actually call this MVP 0 because these prototypes were not to test out an idea, they were the ideas. This was just me grabbing stuff and prototyping materials around me, throwing together different ideas, saying, hey, what if? It was based in the scientific research I did. But if you look at this, this is just a fake wearable. These buttons do not do anything. Instead, it was about asking our users, how would you use these buttons? But the winners and the Moti V0s are the ones on the right here. So basically, I took a desk toy that I had on my desk. I punctured it with a little button. Soldered that up to an Arduino and a speaker. And all it did was you push the button, you get a happy noise. I told 2 guys, actually, so in their later 20s, early 30s, they took them home, came back the next day totally in love with them. So what I saw in talking to them is their eyes lit up because they loved waking up in the morning, seeing this cute thing that was kind of encouraging them. They'd walk by during the house, and when they're walking through the house, get that reminder, but in a fun kind of way. And then they got to reward themselves and have something outside of them validating their good behavior in return. And they like the idea, pushing that button is really, really satisfying. It's basically like checking off something off a checklist, but as I mentioned, it's something external to yourself also acknowledging it. So that was the light bulb moment. And I knew, however, that Moti wasn't going to look like a koala bear or a stingray, so I started to work on what's that next version. And this was where I started to do some parallel processing. So I'm lucky enough that I had the skills to start the electronics myself, but also the CAD skills and the design skills to say, okay, I have a functional electronic thing going on, but what's it actually going to look like in the end, and test out different forms. Part of that was also thinking about, well, what are the interactions? So in addition to just push music, it could be push lights, it could be push haptics, vibrations, still push sounds. I decided to try all 3 and see what would happen. So I started doing some testing with different light patterns with users. It's just a video. And I would also bring users in for form studies. So even though I didn't have a fully fledged product to show them, you can still bring users in to test out different parts of your product at a time. So that early feedback led then into making what I call the MVP1, just packaging it all up together with the electronics, with the lights, the sounds, and the haptics. And this is what I did next with that. So in addition to having now a physical thing that I could talk to people about, saying, hey, here's the idea, which was very valuable, This went straight into user testing. So I took 2 folks, made prototypes for them, and did a deep dive here. So rather than it being more about general knowledge gathering, ideation, it was really about focusing on what would be the device specific to this one individual. So it didn't have to be a huge study yet with like 50 different people, but really focusing on those 2. So the one on the left here put Moti in his office place. It was an open office, which has some interesting results. And then he was trying to drink 8 glasses of water a day. Then the woman on the right here, she had Moti on her bedside table, and she was trying to exercise every day. Both of them came back with really, really great feedback. So if you look at the one on the left, for him, the reminders were the most important part. He would before drink water during the day, but not really know how much. Moti does tracking, so to light up the number of segments in terms of how many times you've done it per day. So even just having that one glance, right, to check, I need to do another one, was the most important part for him. But in addition to that, he started to tell me these stories of how his colleagues interacted with it. So all of a sudden, you have this kind of cute, interesting looking thing that has some lights on it. His colleagues were very intrigued and would ask him about it. This became an opportunity for him to tell them about his app. So if he had just had an app, they would have never, ever known. Now he goes and he fills up his water bottle, he drinks a glass of water, he gets high fives from his colleagues. They congratulate him. And his colleague that sits next to him actually likes to support him because it's really fun. One thing that I didn't anticipate but learned is very, very important with Moti is it facilitates social dialogue because of its physicality. Now looking at the girl on the right here, her favorite part wasn't really about the reminders. Hers was a once-a-day thing. She could kind of remember it. But it was about the repeated rewards. So her Moti would turn red if she hadn't done it, green if she had. And her favorite part was to walk through her house after she'd done it and see the green. So for her, it was a repeated reward of like, walk by, look, yes, I feel really, really good about myself. She told me stories about how she would imagine Moti while she was out running and couldn't wait to get back home and push Moti and say, hey, I did it. So again, getting at more of this emotional experience level, these 2 gave me the confidence to say, okay, I believe this is a really good thing. We've got the basic features down. Sure, we need to add some online capabilities. These didn't even connect to Wi-Fi or Bluetooth. It was just a standalone device. I had the confidence. Now it's about showing the rest of the world to give them confidence. But really quick side note, I also was working on a wearable at the time for the same feature, including lights. Realized very quickly, though, that just technically speaking, this is a big edge. When you have miniaturization of technologies and the battery packs with wearables, so I got enough validation from the stationary object saying, hey, and not to mention with a stationary object, you get this environmental trigger. So it makes more sense psychologically as well. That why should I spend all this technical time and energy for something that really is, yeah, it's trendy right now, wearables are awesome, but you look at the research, there's that downward trajectory in terms of use over time. So I realized very quickly, like, don't even bother with that, even though it sounds really sexy to make a wearable.
If Apple can't figure it out, it's unlikely you will, right?
Yeah.
Let them figure it out first.
I do like my Apple Watch.
Yeah, okay.
So in order to introduce Moti to the rest of the world and see what they thought, I had to present it to them in some way. So what I actually call MVP2 is not for user testing, but for testing out the bigger marketplace. I created a couple different forums, made higher fidelity demos of them, and actually hired a videographer, super cheap, friend of a friend, to make some videos. I designed a website in Squarespace in 48 hours and launched that. And basically the whole design of the website and these videos was to get people to this page of Get Moti and say, hey, you know what Moti is? Like, would you want one? Do you want to be one of the first people to get a Moti? So we were taking a call for applications for our beta, saying, you know, we have actually, I think we said 50 at that point, even though we only made 35. And that was the point. So what happened next is that I had a contact at Fast Company, which was really great. They wrote an article about our beta launch, and then I got a ton of hop-along press afterwards. So from that press, was able to get over 2,000 people apply to our beta. And this was with $0 of marketing, and it was also people who had to check out the box saying, yes, I agree to pay 65 bucks. So we were also doing a little bit of price point testing at this point as well. So what happened is we picked 35 of these folks, and we shipped off beta units to them that were...
Can you talk about how you selected?
Yeah.
What led you to those 35?
Yep. So what we did, let's see, like this spreadsheet here, which you cannot easy at all. Basically, we asked all of those 2,000 people to give us basic demographic information. What habit do they want to form? And then also tell us why we should pick them. So we got a lot of stories about, oh, I have a health issue, or I always struggled with habits. I tried an app, I tried a wearable, like it didn't work. So those stories were really, really important. So what we noticed was, okay, as predicted, which was our target market always to begin with, millennials are the ones flocking towards this. There's like a very significant bell curve around them in terms of just demographics. We also skew 70-30 female, which is interesting. Somewhat expected. We're trying to make it a little bit more even. But if you look at the basic demographics, we tried to replicate that in our data. We also were picking people that were from places that we could ship to really inexpensively, so it had to just be US. And ideally, if we could center it around where we were, we could go in person if we wanted to. That ended up not happening just based off of how we wanted to pick them, because we also had buckets of habit types. So we had a hypothesis around habit, less the type, but more what's the intensity of the habit. So you can imagine there's a big difference between like, I'm gonna drink this water 3 times a day, versus I need to get up off the couch, put on my gym shoes, leave the house, go to the gym, and then exert myself very physically. That's a much higher intensity. So we split up habits based off of that. We were also looking at the location. So is this an office thing? Is this a home thing? And even within the home, is it kitchen versus bedroom versus bathroom? That's how we classified habits. So we wanted to spread to see if we could see any patterns. Yeah.
Just one question. One Moti is for one habit?
Yeah. Yep.
And when we saw the video where the girl was snacking, so she would push the Moti if she had snacked and it would be red? Or
so she would only push the Moti if she had done her exercises. So Moti would know you haven't done your exercises by this time that you normally do them by.
Kayla has a second product. It's a taser gun.
Yeah,
and if you snack, you get tasered.
And the one habit promoting is actually really, really specific and necessary. What we found is that people who have apps that can let you add any type of habit, people will be like, I want to wake up early and exercise every day and do this reading, which is just impossible. We live way too crazy, busy, instant gratification lives. That's very unrealistic. So with Moti, we ask you to self-prioritize. Which is the one, like #1 that you want to knock out of the park first. You can always do another afterwards in series. You can also buy multiple Motis for multiple habits. I will not say no to use buying multiple products for this. But you can link them in the same login, essentially. Okay, so that was, we picked our beta units, then we built our beta units, which was definitely a big undertaking of a few months. This was also the point where I realized that I didn't have all the skills. So I had the skills to build these physical guides, but I didn't have the skills to build our online portions. So this is where I wrapped in a full stack web developer, a data scientist to do behavioral analysis, as well as a firmware engineer.
So to this point, you were by yourself all the time?
Yes. Yeah. At the same time, I was spending all of my time doing this. I did not have a full-time job or anything like that. I came to 30 weeks and was like, this is my chunk of time for myself to focus on this.
Where did you do your production?
In-house. So we bought a 3D printer. Yep. We bought a 3D printer, printed them. I hired an intern to do all the post-processing and sand it and take out all the stuff. It was a laborious process. We did a video of it.
This guy is about to propose to you. Just talk about his wedding day.
I taught the intern also, which was really great. So I did really well.
I noticed just in that previous slide, they're actually slightly different. Like the three.
Yep.
So what's the thought process there?
Yeah, so the thought process was, in order to facilitate the emotional bonding and the relationship building with the device, that is our main kind of crux of it, people will do that more if they get to pick from many and say, this is mine. Like, I picked this from these video forums, I love this one. Also, they got 5 different color choices, which is insane. We had so much spray painting to do. The funny thing is now we're realizing we're going to focus on one forum, maybe like 2 or 3 more options, just to make it sane from a manufacturing point of view. But when we were doing them in-house by hand, it was actually really easy to just like print this one, print that one. It's fine.
Okay, so
By the way, we're going to do a Q&A. I just wanted to let Kayla get through her slides. You look like you need to. You got. She's going to go through a few more slides, then we're going to sit down and we're going to open up for questions. Okay, just let her get through the basic deck. Okay.
Cool. Okay. So I was at the online portion, so this is where I brought in team members to support that. I still did like all the design work behind this, but left the web connectivity portions to the experts. So what was great about our beta is it was twofold. So it was about learning, but it was also about validation. So at this point, we were able to get really impactful quotes, understand more of the user experiences. So for instance, realizing that this one guy was super obsessed with the feedback of pushing that button, and that even something that simple is a really big driver for folks. Also, we thought that people were going to cheat a lot and push the button when they didn't. None of our beta testers did that. They felt really, really guilty and thought that was cheating. And that made me really happy because that was one thing that I was worried about. One of the biggest things we learned, though, was that life happens. So we expected, like, oh, the people who are going to rank Moti the highest are the ones that are best at their habit, which are the ones that are doing their habit the most, which is totally false. So the people who even rank Moti as really, really great, their graphs are all over the place. And this is because they were going on vacation. They had family emergencies. They fell on the stairs and broke a bunch of their bones. That happens to one beta user. They all of a sudden had to take care of an infant that they weren't expecting to. So basically, all these things came up in their life to block them from getting habit formation. But what Moti is great at is getting people at least above doing nothing. Or if they weren't doing anything during vacation, it's that moment when you come back home and get back into your normal routine that Moti helps you get back on the horse. Whereas otherwise, you might just let it to the side. I'm going to skip through a couple of these, but these are the main insights that we also got from the beta, comparing it to an app or a wearable. But in terms of the validation side, we also got to get more quantitative in addition to the qualitative. This isn't even
Kayla,
most of them.
Those just maybe one or two, right?
Okay,
So like,
yeah.
for example, right, this is very important. This is the experience, right? So we talked a lot about mapping experience, right? So what's the experience, right? The experience is I'm pushing notifications at a moment that is not opportune, right?
Yeah.
So maybe just a quick learning
Yeah.
or two that led you to kind of evolve your design.
So
That's
one
important.
thing that we
Yeah.
realized a lot from our beta users was also the validation around the physical object versus having it be an app. So everyone in their interviews talked about this moment of either I walk through the door when I get home from work, I'm tired, I'm like in bed, but I see Moti out of the corner of my eye. So because it's a cute thing, because I have this relationship with it, I'm not feeling like it's nagging me. It's more of a friendly reminder. Or they wake up and it's the first thing that they see. So rather than a single moment with the push notification, Moti is ambient. Moti is always there. You may not do it right now, but the next time you look at it, that's maybe the right time. We talked about the pushing the button already. This external entity that's your friend that you have a bond with, as opposed to just an interface on your phone that's also doing a million other things. So when I look at this, I don't immediately think of my habit app and the habits I have there, but when I look at Moti, it's intrinsically connected symbolically in my brain to that habit. Plus the ability to personalize and prioritize. We talked about the one habit, one Moti thing. Moti lets you do any habit. So as opposed to a wearable that's just based off of step counts or heart rates, or an app that lets you do like a million different things, Moti helps you curate, but still be totally customizable. So those were some of our key insights. And I was talking about the quantitative as well. So being able to get key, even though it's only going to be 35 in the end, we're still getting the last people through. But being able to basically say, like, look, the most people right now strongly agree that Moti has been essential to their habit progress. So people, especially investors, quite frankly, always ask, like, why can't this be an app? I show them the insights before, I show them these types of things. So that's most of what I wanted to go through. The wrap-up key takeaways, and this is my contact info, if you can see it. So feel free to reach out. But there's the lowest fidelity first. So that koala bear, that was the pivotal moment. That was the aha moment, and you saw how it progressed iteratively from there. Know your MVP's purpose. So the first MVPs were about ideation. The second one was more about learning. The third one was a bit of learning and getting to the next step, but also more about validation. Oh wait, sorry, the third one was the market stuff. So it was less about learning. It was learning in a different way. Learning, is this something that's appealing to people in addition to does it actually work? And then the final one was more about validation. And always be testing. That's probably ingrained in here. What I found is whenever I was the most down about Moti, because as an entrepreneur, you're always having these highs and these lows. They often correlated to when I had been in touch with my users. So when I get in touch with my users, even if it's negative feedback, you feel like you're learning, you know what the next step is, you don't feel like, oh, I don't know what to do. Like your users are the way that you guide yourself through the process.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Thank you. Almost became an architect.
Yeah.
And we mentioned this in the break room. I want to show you and the rest of the class.
This is like connected to internet. So.
Oh, it's not. Okay. All right. So Lorena, can you bring up your laptop real quick? Oh, you know, mine's up here. I'm sorry. Let me move yours. I want to show you. It's a literally like 1 minute and 40-second video. It's this MIT City Home project, but it's also extremely design centric. And I would love to get your reaction to it. And then we'll sit down and we'll have an open Q&A with the rest of the class. Okay? But this is a really fascinating project. I took in my design thinking class this Media Lab last year, and we got a demo of this specific. All right. Probably use you. So you had wanted to be an architect, right? And of course, architecture is that unique blend of engineering and art, right? It's a remarkable convergence, right? I have a cousin that went to RPI, has a degree in architecture, and he's never really practiced at the level he'd like, right? It's a very, very difficult profession to practice in. But the whole notion of design thinking was born in the world of architecture, right? And so Frank Lloyd Wright, one of my heroes, was someone who was a classic American architect that had created the craftsman style and built the design of the home around your personal life, right? And so industry has sort of co-opted design thinking. And Steve Jobs, probably more than anyone, was the person that brought that into the commercial space, right? So you see something like this, right? How do you react to something like this?
I'm actually extremely skeptical.
Okay.
I would really like to take a look at their user research. So when
Okay.
I look at that, I would never be able to own those because I'm way too messy. I would have, like, where would my clothes be? They end up on the bed, on the chairs. Now, would this help me be probably less messy? Maybe, but I would be kicking and screaming throughout that process.
Okay.
That said, there are a couple of moments where I did see a lot of potential where I wonder if they're doing too much. So this is where like feature creep comes in. I see the extended counter space as being extremely useful, and I see the lights. But those are very like specific, simple elements,
Right.
as opposed to, oh, every time I want to have my desk, I have to make my bed, put my bed back, and I can't just switch simultaneously from like laying on my bed with my laptop to then switching to the desk. So I'd be really curious to see how people use these and where they came up with it.
Yeah.
I think there's been like a couple of different modular designs on this type of stuff.
Okay.
I also look at the gestures
Yeah.
and wonder if it's almost like too much tech. So I actually have big criticisms of like touch screens when you could have physical buttons. So one example is, what is it called? Is it the Chevy Bolt? One of the smart cars, basically,
Okay, yeah.
where they have this interface, which is super beautiful, super modern. But in order for me to switch things on the radio, I have to like find the right buttons on the touch screen. I know there's some on the dashboard versus my old 2003 Subaru,
Yeah.
where I can like physically find the button with my finger because they're raised up.
Right.
And so I think that we're going in a trend of like, oh, it's really sexy and cool to have, you know, gestures or these different things, but are they actually functional?
And is it dangerous to be searching on your dashboard for 3 seconds?
Exactly.
Take your
Yeah,
eye
and
off
take
it?
my eyes off
Yeah.
of it. Exactly.
Yeah.
So with the gestures, I don't know what's their fidelity, because I see a lot of potential for frustration. I mean, my dad has an Amazon Echo, and it's hilarious
Is it really?
to listen to him.
Yeah.
Like, Alexa, a little louder, please. Alexa, a little louder,
You
please.
guys know the Amazon Echo? Do you all know the Amazon Echo?
So I think that actually is probably a higher fidelity
Yeah.
than, or you know, higher functionality than gestures at this point in technology. But that's another thing I would look into is like having 3 or 4 buttons. Would that actually be a better user experience than having to be like, oh, this thing and that thing?
Yeah,
That's-
cool, thank you.
But, yeah.
For your honest, constructive critique. Now, last question before I open up. So you just moved here a week ago, and you've been in my classroom in Boston. You gave a great talk at my Startup Next event. You demoed at Demo Day, right? But you're now here in the Valley,
Yeah.
and you've been here a week, and you already found a core hire,
Mhm.
an electrical engineer, 1 week.
Yeah, we'll see how he does. He's starting on Monday.
He's on probation. You're a tough chick, I gotta tell you. You guys on probation, right? So you've come here to this accelerator now called Highway 1, which is not a pre-accelerator, it's a real accelerator, right? What do you hope to accomplish between now and the time you exit this accelerator?
Yeah, so if you look at Moti's timeline, this is a question I often get, like, how long has the Moti been around? I first started tackling the problem of habit formation in September. Came up with the idea, so like that Koala Bear one in October, turned that into that first kind of MVP, that single one, by the beginning of December, and then was user testing 2 of those in January. We launched in March with that beta launch. We incorporated shortly thereafter, and then we sent out the betas in June. Yes, we sent out the betas in June. They were a little delayed. And so that's kind of what the timeline has been up until now. When we look at the next steps, so we're getting really good info from the beta. We're hoping to raise some investment money off of that. And with the Highway 1 accelerator, it's hardware focused, which is great. So our goal is the next 4 months of the accelerator is to learn about mass manufacturing, to make the next iteration of Moti with a couple of slight feature changes, as well as looking into developing more of the app side of it. And this is to create what we're calling a pilot, being different from the beta. So the pilot is a larger unit count, it's probably going to be around 200. And the point of this is less about validation and learning, because we got a lot of that with our beta, and more about testing out new distribution channels. So we've gotten interest from employee assistance programs. These are groups that will partner with companies and provide their employees with actually like therapists that they can go to for a limited number of sessions for any type of issue that they're having. So they're interested in Moti because most of what their therapists do is try and instill better habits in their clients. And it's really hard to do that in a limited amount of time. And when you only have these one-on-one sessions once in a while, and it's their job to then translate it into their lives. So Moti would be a really good in-between that therapist and client setting. We're also in talks with groups that do workshops at companies or other types of groups or schools that are all about habit formation, since it is so fundamental to our overall health and happiness. So they're looking at us as piloting and then potentially white labeling to their thousands of users in their database.
So let me connect this to the class. So we've been talking a lot about design thinking, lean startup, and ultimately business model viability, right? So think about the MVPs as sort of problem solution fit. okay? There was a problem. I had trouble keeping a habit, or I had trouble, making a habit. She was able to validate through a variety of different fidelity, MVPs, whether there was a solution that solved that problem. And with the enthusiastic feedback that she received, the validation was very strong, right? There's a lot of engagement, there's a lot of enthusiastic qualitative feedback. Now she is searching for a business model, and she is looking at a variety of target customer segments or a variety of stakeholders. One could be a B2B model, and that B2B model is we're going to work, it's a B2B2C model, right? We're going to work with employee assistance programs that are essentially proxies for corporations. And these employee assistance programs may be the key to high volume sales, where large corporations could wind up taking on hundreds or thousands of these things as they work to help their employees, optimize their health, their mental health, etc., right? So this is now the search for a business model. We've done what I would call the problem solution fit, and now we're getting to product market fit in the search for a business model. So just to connect with what we've been talking about, okay? Now maybe one last question, because you've thought, everything you do, you've thought through so deeply. You thought deeply about crowdfunding, but ultimately decided not to, and you had some really thoughtful reasons as to why you chose not to.
Yeah, and the point being, we haven't chose to do that for our beta, or
Right.
yet. It's something that might come down the line in the future. So the reason, if you look at crowdfunding with something like Kickstarter, there's two models here. There's, you go to Kickstarter to just get your beta off the ground. Maybe this is a limited run. You're not doing it for publicity as much. You're trying to get some early adopters, get a little bit of money to just sort of ship out your first units, learn as much, and then iterate to the final product. Or you go to Kickstarter with your final product and you use it as a marketing platform. And this is where you want to just pull out all the stops. You're aiming to get over $300,000. Many different users get that TechCrunch article based off of how quickly you raised and how many days. And two very different things. Now with the beta, we didn't have to go to Kickstarter because we did it ourselves. So we did the beta launch. We made a very I made a very polished website with these videos, crafted it in a way to make it look like it was a real thing. And as you saw, we got over 2,000 applicants. So we fulfilled our beta without having to pay Kickstarter their fees, which can range up to 10% once you get in with the payment processing and things like that. Now, when you look, we've always thought of ourselves in the latter camp. So we are planning after the pilot program to scale up for mass manufacturing to kind of release the floodgates sometime in January. We were talking about this earlier where there's a decision to be made, but if you think about the #1 day of the year for Moti, it's New Year's Eve or New Year's Day. When everyone is making those resolutions, they're buying those gym memberships, they're saying like, this is the habit essentially that I want to form. So we've got free marketing that we need to tackle and piggyback on. So we're planning our launch around that season. Now, whether it's at the aspirational point or whether it's at the end of January when nobody has made any progress on their resolutions, and so we say, hey, do you need some help with that? Yeah. Remember when you read that article about us on New Year's, but we weren't ready, we weren't launching yet? So somewhere around that. That's like
very important strategic decision.
Now, in order to do that latter bit, to blow it out of the water, if you look at most Kickstarter campaigns that do that, they've spent at least $50,000 in marketing. They've hired their PR agent. They spent a ludicrous amount of money doing a professional video, those kinds of things. So what we're trying to do is really do a lot of preparation. And that's going to take at least a month, and that's going to take a decent amount of funding.
Yeah, cool. All right, so let's open it. Mary, I'm going to give you the first crack. Mary? Yeah?
I have two questions. One was, you talked about the cheating part, and
yeah.
like you found out from the users that they actually don't cheat, but have you thought about something, maybe to connect it to a wearable device to prevent the kind of tracking, or do you not want to have the tracking at all? And the second question before you answer that, it's an easy one. What does the name mean?
Yep.
How did you come up with
I'll do the easy one first,
okay.
Right off the bat. So Moti comes from the combination of motivation, which is pretty obvious, but also emotion. That's our main hypothesis, right? That you can't have motivation without that emotional connection. And then we were also following this weird thing where if you look at social robotics, you look at like Jibo, Siri, Wall-E, these kinds of things, it's like 2-syllable, vaguely Japanese sounding names. So it was about literally writing out a list of words that relate to motivation and engagement and like emotion and stuff like that, and then using this 2-syllable mechanism and like filling in different parts of these words. So that's how it came. And then your second question, or your first question of the two, was about the cheating and tracking and things like that. So it's really easy with Moti to do something like if this then that, and connect a Fitbit, connect any other sensor, and port that in as the logic for Moti beyond the push button. Now the interesting thing is that from a psychological point of view, that's not as good. Because when you have this moment of pushing a button, it's a binary thing. You're acknowledging to yourself that you've just done something good, so you're celebrating your small win. And there's something external validating you. Whereas with a Fitbit, like you only get that if you do the 10,000 steps, and you don't do it, you aren't getting those small win celebrations as much. It's not as conscious, and you're not the one saying, yes, I did the thing. And so there is a little bit of, from our side, something to think about whether we're going to do that, but it would be technically very easy.
Okay,
Yeah.
we're seeing the hand. So Levon, then I'm going to go over to Alex, and I'm going to go over to Sharif, and we're going to work our way back, okay? We'll get you all, okay? All right, Levon.
I think it's a great idea. And I have a question about, I experienced that sometimes people who are using the wearables to track emotions, when they miss something, they're starting to feel themselves discouraged
Yeah. Yep.
to go and keep tracking more and more, because they already missed, for example, a bottle of water or something. Have you experienced that?
Yeah.
And if so, how you address it?
So here's the thing that we found. We didn't specifically design around it, but we found that it naturally occurred where people love Moti also because it refreshes at the beginning of every day. They're not really going online and looking at that graph, to be honest, unless they want, the use scenario there is like someone at the end of the week, like just wants to look back on their progress. But honestly, they're interacting with the device mostly, and the device resets every day. So if you haven't done your habit yesterday, it doesn't really care. It cares about whether or not you've done it today. So for people, they find that when they look at Moti, it's more of a in-the-day thing rather than like a bigger trajectory thing. Now the trajectory comes in with the evolution. So you might be a little disappointed that your Moti celebration is a little bit smaller and less exciting, but you still get the celebration and you still get that validation.
Alex?
Yeah, so kind of marketing question, and it connects to the one's question as well, and merits. So I completely agree that pushing button is like a killer feature, but how you can explain people that because of this button, actually, this device is unique, because a lot of people tried these hybrid applications, everything, and they are discouraged because of this. How are you going to explain people that your device will solve their problem?
Yeah, so you're talking about for the users versus
Yeah, exactly.
the investor or something like that. Our target users are people who have already used apps or wearables and it's failed. So those are really the people that we're trying to target out. Now, if they haven't used a solution, what we found is the people who like Moti are those that don't consider themselves early tech adopters. So if you have early tech adopters, most likely they've tried apps or wearables, and so they're not going to have success with them. But the non-techies, what they find appealing to Moti isn't necessarily our marketing; it's just the object itself. So it's designed in a way that's kind of cute, that's attractive, that you want to place in your home, that you already want to interact with, regardless of what your habit is or whether you want to. So we've found that, like the device almost does the marketing for itself and the storytelling around the device of, hey, this is pure positive reinforcement. Majority of our beta users pick the encouraging personality rather than sad or angry because they already knew enough about themselves that they need more positive rather than negative.
All right, Sharif? Guys, I see a lot of hands. I promise you, we're going to call on you. So we're going to do it very systematically. So don't get nervous that you won't get called on, all right? Sharif, go for it.
I love your embedded system skills for this device, for sure. So one thing which I'm really skeptical about is we are entering into an era of devices overload.
Yeah.
IoT's coming big time, right?
He works for him.
And
So he speaks with great conviction about his employer. Yeah.
so I've seen a lot of devices coming in, like Jaibo you just mentioned.
Yeah.
Right? How are you trying to protect your device? Because Jaibo, it would take like a flick to implement this kind of design in Jaibo. They're already doing it. They're already targeting it, right? They're connecting to their kids. They can touch, feel the emotion. They're working big time on that. Right? So what is your unique value? How are you going to protect this?
Yeah, so let's compare Moti to Jibo, which is something that I do a lot. So Jibo A price point is huge. It's big, it's going to be bulky. And it shares a similar issue with cell phones where like Jibo's gonna have its app store and it's gonna have these multiple things going on at once. So you aren't gonna do the thing where you look at Moti and you're like, Moti equals habit. Moti is very specific. Moti is more affordable at like a 65, even just like a sub $100 price point. And its whole purpose of being is your habit. So that's where we see ourselves as being different. Yes, Jibo could have an app that's running on it, that's for your habit formation, but it's competing with the other apps that are your calendar, that's your bedtime stories, et cetera, et cetera. Also, just the number of people who have a Jibo probably is going to be very small in the next few years, not to mention they aren't delivering it for at least another year, and we're moving super, super quickly.
So Sharib asks the classic question that every entrepreneur gets, right? Which is, okay, some large company can add a feature and roll over and crush you, right? So some of you are working on Amazon in our video on demand case, right? Amazon has had a video on demand platform for years. Their penetration of the US market is infinitesimal. Because when I think of Amazon, I do not think of video on demand. When I think of Netflix, I think of video on demand, right? So there's always this question, you know, will a large, well-funded startup crush the incumbent? Everything we've talked about in this class from yesterday morning at 9 o'clock is about agility and focus, okay? So it's all about what does a company stand for. If you stand for one thing, what you stand for, they know exactly what that one thing is.
And if you look at the people that we're more afraid of are people like Fitbit. So it's who shares our vision of helping people become a better version of themselves. So Fitbit, as they're learning, you know, oh crap, smartwatches are coming out. Who's going to want a Fitbit and a smartwatch? There either has to get the market has to get narrower, which you see it because they're making their own version of a smartwatch. So it's for people who aren't going to buy an Apple Watch, or they need to expand and think more creatively about what their product line really is. So for us, it's more maybe they realize, oh, we need more of this emotional connection kind of thing, and we're learning that from our research. Let's make something that's more similar to Moti. But at that point, because they're bigger, they're probably going to take a longer time to make decisions. We would hope that they would just acquire us instead, rather than making their own one from the ground up.
Cool. All right, Ash went up. Okay. Now I'm going to come back to Andres. Come back to you next. Okay? Yeah.
So, during the beta phase, you mentioned that you had 2,000 applicants. So, how do you choose your demographics and pick up those 35?
Yep.
And then, once you finalize, how do you plan to scale on the mass production from 3D printing forward?
So one thing I didn't mention before when I was talking about picking was that I was very involved. So imagine going through manually for 2,000 people and tagging their habit in order to see what are the habits. Like we could get demographic spreads. We knew that we wanted to focus on millennials for a number of reasons, so that helped us when narrowing down. What I did is I emailed everyone who applied on that 2,000 list and said, hey, we'd love more information from you. So it like weeded people out based off of who was willing to do a second survey that asked them a lot of questions. So it's self-selecting of who's going to be more participatory, and we got more info from them. Which honestly, we didn't really need that info to pick. It was more about like who are the top 500 people, or 900, 500, 900, or someone, the hundreds of people who applied to the second one. So that automatically cut it by half, which was great. And then I hired an intern to tag the rest. But we basically picked it based off of demographics. Where were they located? Our top cities were Boston, New York, and San Francisco, so we tried to core it around there. And then what were their habits? And that was secondary, so that automatically cut a bunch of people out, and then we looked at their stories. So I basically manually just went through and was like, this guy has a good story.
And it's great learning, right?
Yeah, oh yeah, really good.
Cool. Andres?
I really like your product. It's really, really good to me. Is there any reason for you put a cable there?
Yeah.
Because if you don't have cable, you can, for example, put that in a car, or is there any
That's something our
reason to
beta
put that
users
cable?
asked for. From a technical point of view is the issue. So we are running a Wi-Fi module all the time. We also have LEDs that are running all the time. Those two things are huge power sucks. Now, we can probably get smart about location sensing on your phone. Are you at home, or are you near your Moti or not, and then put it to sleep. You know, we do have sleep settings where people can turn it off at night or when they're not in the office, but that's pretty set. So from an engineering point of view, even if we put a battery in there, it's not going to last very long. And you're always going to have to be charging it. Plus, the idea is that it becomes an environmental cue, so it needs to stay in one place anyways. So the combination of both those things said, okay, we're going to do cable. Now, down the line, because so many people ask us this, this could be a premium product where we actually design an inductive charging pad that Moti sits on and charges that way. So it doesn't look like a charger plug in the back. You have this bay that you can take Moti off temporarily if you wanted to, and where it seems like it's more portable when really it's not.
Son?
Actually, I just had a question on, for habit formation. How did you figure out is there a time frame on which that you determined that the habit had been formed? And is it based on the individual, or do you guys decide to form?
Couple things. So if you look at the research, I mean, everyone says, 21 days. Yeah, that's a really old study that's kind of obscure. The most recent one says average is 66 days, but the important thing, the range is anywhere from, I think, 18 to 254.
Wow.
So that doesn't really help us. For us, what we're looking at is, our study ran for a month. We look at 2 to 3 months as being, if you're doing that consistently, this is when Moti's gonna start being like, hey, we think that you've formed your habit, let's start doing the habit exit process. But for us, what's almost more important is, does the user feel like they've formed the habit? And everyone comes back and says, the test of that is whether they feel like they're missing something in their life when they aren't doing their habit. And that's kind of the test. So for us, we're going to rely a little bit on our users to tell us when they think that they've formed their habit. At the same time, we've got feedback from our beta saying, like, I think I've formed it, but I really just want to keep using Moti anyways. They formed that bond, they like the feedback. Some people actually don't want to form a new habit with it because it's so symbolically connected to the first person.
Cool.
But hey, they want to buy another one.
Yeah,
Awesome.
Rashmi, go for it. Rashmi, yeah.
I have two questions. One is regarding your customer segments. You talked about how you were picking your applicants from your bid and your beta stage.
Yeah.
You're filtering them based on what kind of habit, whether they're willing, how willing they are to farm it, where they're located, and whether you have a strong enough connection with them to test it properly. In the longer term, I imagine that you want to expand. So from your findings till now, do you have a certain kind of customer that you think is more likely to be using this product, a certain segment that you narrowed down?
Yeah, if we look at, let's make a persona, because there's a couple different ones, but our primary one is probably female, 29, lives in a city, tried apps.
Talking about you. She's talking about you, Rashmi, isn't she?
Hi, Moti.
I'm actually on your side, didn't you?
Oh, wonderful. And then, has tried to form a habit in the past and has tried apps and wearables, or wants some type of tech solution in the past and it's failed. That's the person who's going to succeed based off of all the research right now. That said, let's abstract it out a little bit more to that general, like, early tech adopter, millennial crowd. We want to start to think about what the design impacts are for more of a slightly, like, older, more professional persona. But at the same time, we've gotten good feedback from this target. Then if you look down the line, so expanding to totally different market types, we are very much thinking about what's Moti for kids look like. This, even though it looks a little bit like a toy, is definitely for adults. What would Moti for kids be like? To help them brush their teeth or whatever. We've had elementary school teachers write to us being like, please give us a Moti so that we can teach our students soft skills. Now, totally other side of the spectrum, aging baby boomers, seniors, they're getting more forgetful, they're forgetting their routines, maybe they're forgetting to take their medication. That's a huge market. And we have a hypothesis that they're going to react better to an emotionally driven, super simple push-button device rather than a complex technology like many solutions on the market.
Okay. So Rashmi, no, I'm sorry, we got too many hands up. Barrett, you had your hand up. I promised we're gonna get you guys. Okay.
So I had a question about the usability feature. It's all about maintaining the habits which you currently have. Like, what about creating or kind of giving up some kind of habits? And also the mindset. If I'm a user, right? If I go and buy a Fitbit, for me it's more like, okay, I'm gonna start running from tomorrow to figure it out. But what's the advantage for me as a user to go in and get motivated?
Yeah. So the first one was,
the usability feature. In terms of, it's about maintaining the habits.
Right, so like forming new habits versus quitting bad ones? Yeah. So that was a question that we had to decide very early on when we chose to focus on forming. It lends itself more to positive reinforcement. And when you look at the research, to quit a bad habit, so habit cessation, you can't just do it cold turkey. You need to, the best suggestions are that you form a good habit that replaces the bad habit. So what you would do with Moti is then use it for the forming a good habit that replaces it. And then your second part was about, what's going to entice you to buy a Moti. If you think about the persona that I just described, you kind of already have a habit in mind. It's the thing that you struggle with a little bit. And so you know, when you see Moti, you're like, oh yeah, I immediately know what I would use it for. Now, people who don't have that feeling, there definitely will still market to them, but we're gonna need to help them a little bit along saying, hey, like you could use this to run, you could use this to do that. So it's about how we tell our user stories. So our website right now has 3 videos. We didn't just make one. It's about someone who wants to go to bed earlier, someone who wants to drink water more often, and someone who wants to exercise. So hopefully one of those might like resonate exactly.
Go for it.
That's okay. I think it's handling one of the most important problem that people have on the world. And have you thought about social media concept? Because it is solving a major problem, and because people, when they tend to be happy, they try to share it in Facebook, Twitter, all these things. So have you thought about social media concept embedding into your product?
So I would say we've got generally about social in a bigger sense. So social is really important. Now, pushing to Facebook and Twitter, we've always had the stance that that's going to be really easy. Instead, what you see happening for social with Moti is what I described before. It's the people in your immediate habit environment that are helping you celebrate, and also can probably see Moti if it's like a significant other who lives with you and say, hey, I saw Moti says that you haven't done your thing yet, which did happen in our beta. And so that's the social that we're looking for. That said, if you look at Fitbit, Jawbone, the people that we talked to anecdotally who kept using them in the long term were those who had competitions with their friends and family. So social to us also means less Facebook, but more, you know, people can use Moti for different things, but we're abstracting your progress enough that you can compare and have leaderboards with your friends and family. That's a down the line feature.
Like a gamification? Like a gamification?
Oh yeah, a little bit.
Oh.
But more like, hey, I'm drinking water, you're trying to exercise, like, you know, my friend over here is trying to do push-ups every day, who's doing the best, and how can we help motivate each other for that.
Cool. Andrea?
Sorry, have you tested the user experience with multiple Motis or in the case of the reminders and the engagement of the user?
Sorry, could you repeat it?
Have you tested the user experience with more than one device in
I
terms
see
of
what
the
you're saying.
verification?
No, we have not. No.
Raphael?
As an entrepreneur, which was the most difficult moment that you have to face, and how you overcame?
I think it's more a series of moments that lead up to this existential crisis that keeps coming up every once in a while about what type of entrepreneur I want to be. So I'm a designer, and as you can probably tell, I'm a huge product person. I love interfacing with users and, you know, designing the thing and building the thing. I'm put in a role right now where, like, this is great. We have very little funding. Crap. I have to play CEO, and I don't think I'm the best fundraiser in the world, to be honest. But this company is early on, and I need to be driving the vision for it right now, so I have to be CEO. So this is something where the biggest difficulty for me is imagining a couple years down the line, am I still the CEO, and if not, who is? And it terrifies me to think of either me being stuck in a role that isn't making me happy because I'm getting farther and further away from the product, or me bringing someone on board that I don't fully trust, and I don't know if they're going to lead the vision correctly. So that's where that's the biggest thing.
And that's a good chat you and I can have.
Yeah.
Because I'm confident that you would be the world's best chief product officer, or chief innovation officer, or chief experience officer. Right? That's your role. That's the role you're going to play.
I will make up a role for myself
and
somehow.
it's just a matter of getting someone who buys into your why. Okay, Lena? Yeah.
Because you think about everything, did you choose the accelerator here, or do you have choices?
No,
what was the
so I always knew an accelerator was going to be helpful for different reasons. I applied to YC, got an interview, didn't get it in the end, mostly because it was like hardware and not software. And from there, I really knew that I needed to go to a hardware accelerator because that's where our kind of bottleneck is on mass manufacturing. So applied to a couple, got into 2. Coming to Highway 1 was a no-brainer because it's in San Francisco. They take you to China for 2 weeks. You know, it's really, even though the money is great and also not enough, but it's more they have professional engineers on board that you can go to with any issues. So really, you know, having that, knowing that it's specific for hardware, and there's other accelerators that are specific for different target segments.
Yeah, so
and that's really important.
So accelerators have become far more specialized. They started off as being very horizontal, right? Today there are, like, we opened up an accelerator in Canada about healthcare IT. There are Qualcomm has an accelerator for robotics today. Okay? The Los Angeles Dodgers just opened up an accelerator. For those of you who know professional baseball, the Los Angeles Dodgers just opened up an accelerator for people that are building innovations around professional sports. Okay? So the industry is getting extremely specialized, as it has to, because you can't compete as a horizontal accelerator against the Techstars or against the Y Combinator. They own that brand. They own that position in the marketplace. So this is the exact right place for her to be. The only other alternative really was something called RGA, which is a Techstars accelerator in New York City, but it's not working, it's not in operation this year, and it's great that she comes out to the West Coast anyway and gets the perspective of this community since she's already worked in New York City for 30 weeks, right? All right, since you were gonna, okay, I'm gonna go with Andre. I'll come back, I promise I'll come back, yeah. Andre, go for it, and then who else? RT, you had your hand up?
No, no.
Okay, all right.
Thank you for being with us. My question for the business model would be, do you think about using another revenue stream by using the data? Because I think now in the time of data analytics, a lot of companies might be interested in getting these kind of habits that people actually want to stop or want to achieve in the future. So that
yeah, so business model, totally absent from my presentation, but really, really important. And in this day and age, it's really hard to convince an investor on direct device sales for hardware. Right? So we position ourselves as more that Moti is a platform, a hardware platform for software. Now, the data is less of the thing, it's more about recurring revenue. So Moti's going to have an app, and this app is going to have a premium subscription that lets you do more things. So for instance, we'll give people their basic graphs and their basic data, but if you want to have those social competitions, you want to be able to push Moti remotely through your app when you're on vacation. You want to opt into communities that are working on the same habit as you are and have forums and also specific modules designed for you to help you make that stepwise. So these are experiences that, in addition to like picking new Moti personalities, customizing different things on your Moti, will be unlocked with that premium subscription. Now, we haven't done really good testing on how many people will do that, which is really hard when you've only got 35 users. So when we go to the pilot, that's something we're going to be looking at, as well as with launch. So that gets us our recurring revenue, as well as like one-off in-app purchases. Now, you talked about data. For us, we're not looking at that right now. And that's partially because of not respect, but like, it gets a little bit morally ambiguous for us with selling users' data to third parties. Now, what we are committed to is helping to support and move like the academic research part of habits and putting that into the public sphere. So we're going to be making a report on those 2,000 people who applied, being like, what are the most common habits? You know, what are any other trends that we see or patterns that we see? So that's what we're looking to do with the data at this point.
That's very cool. Anush?
So I have a question regarding the process itself. So in any product or service that we design, we have a lot of assumptions, right? So did you have any formal process of tracking those assumptions? Because you did a lot of iterative process coming up with MVPs, so how did that play into your process?
So we had Google Docs that were like questions and assumptions, and then assumptions that kind of went into hypotheses with both of them together. I'm trying to think of some of our early assumptions.
Well, the first assumption is would people use a haptic device to
I mean,
reinforce
the
the
big
habit at
assumption
the most
was
fundamental level?
the physicality of it rather than going with an app. That was a big assumption that we tested. And then also that like emotionally driven thing, will people connect with that and use? So now a lot of our assumptions did end up getting validated. And what happened was more that like we found stuff that we weren't expecting at all, like the social elements or like these other parts.
And that's the point, right? You don't know. Until you put the boat in the water, you don't know if it's going to sail. You just don't know. Right? Tim?
I have a question regarding the usage of the device. As a customer, I would like to use it for more than one habit, but maybe you, as a seller, you would like to have only one habit because then you can maybe sell like 2 or 3. So how do you deal with this opposite intentions?
Yeah, so I like mentioned the psychology of having one per Moti is also really important from that element, but also like you mentioned, it's important from a selling perspective. So we're hoping to price like affordable enough that people can buy more than one and say that yes, this is an option. And also explain to them the reasoning behind just having one that you need to prioritize.
Yeah, as you said, there's a real emotional connection to that device around that habit.
Yeah, and then you can also imagine this being a premium feature. Where you push Moti once and you're for one habit, now you push and hold and you get another. But there's a lot of technical issues there with how do you display your progress for more than one habit. So it's not something we're going to be looking into in the near future.
And it's a fascinating thing, the emotional connection. It's almost like a marital infidelity, that I have committed to this device for this habit, and if I start doing another habit with this device, I'm cheating on my first habit, right? So there's something, seriously, I mean, there's something very, very primal about what you create.
Well, it's funny
right?
that you mentioned that. So we're not the first ones who are doing something like that.
Right.
If you look at Japanese culture, historically, there's a thing called a Daruma doll that maybe some of you are familiar with. It's this little kind of semi-anthropomorphized idol figure thing that has 2 white eyes. You color one eye black when you commit to a goal. You put it in your home that's visually displayed, and then you fill the other one in when you completed that goal. So we're basically making a 21st century Daruma doll.
Awesome. All right. So I've got Asier, and then I've got Karim, and then I've got Tobias, and then I'm going to come back to Andrea, and then I'm going to come back to Ailette. Okay. What are you doing for dinner?
You guys apparently.
All right. Okay.
So regarding the product roadmap, do you plan to evolve the features to include like emotional support or helping people detect their blind spots? Or because, for example, in the apps, there is a big market for self-improvement apps, and there is a lot of demand for that. So maybe new versions of the product that could address.
Could you phrase that in a specific way? I'm still trying to grasp the question.
Yeah. So, for example, we do new versions of Moti in order to address new problems. Right now, it's very specific in habit forming.
Yeah.
But for example, providing emotional support or like more like a coach that will help you identify your blind spots.
So we say habits because it's a really easy to understand term. Really, what Moti is about doing more things that you wish you did. So for us, from like a marketing perspective, we say habits. It's something that we could look into down the line. It also comes into play with white labeling, where some third party may be interested in using Moti for a slightly different purpose, and then we'll white label with them.
But maybe with a different product or as an evolution of.
Yeah, there's something else that, in addition to like Moti for kids, Moti for Asian baby boomers, we're also like, I can imagine we've partnered with the American Lung Association and made a Moti that's specifically for smoking. But that's something that's going to be years down the line.
Right, and this is the magic, right? There's an infinite number of choices, but clearly this woman is saying she hasn't raised any capital. So how do you pursue an infinite world of possibilities when you have really no choice but to focus ruthlessly to get validation around 1 or 2 use cases, and then you earn the right to expand, right? So this is the challenge. This is the great paradox of entrepreneurship, right? There's 70 of you in the room, and you've come up with 30 different ideas of what you could do. Now, she's getting mentored by people, and she's got her own ideas, and she's getting other ideas thrown at her every day, and it's called mentor whiplash, okay? And at the end of the day, this 25-year-old woman, who's a first-time CEO, ultimately has to make the final decision as to where we focus this business, right? That is a hugely challenging and ultimately satisfying issue when you get it right. But this is the calculus that you have to go through. It's insane, okay? It's insane. Kareem?
All right. Are you planning, of course you're planning to develop the Moti, like to further develop it, but if you look, there are certain common habits that a lot of people are trying to do or not do, like for example, smoking, eating healthy, having a healthy lifestyle. Are you planning to do specific Motis for specific habits that would track these habits?
So not specific Motis. Moti is the platform. Now it's all about how do you set up and curate your Moti's experience. That's what it's about. So as I mentioned a little bit before, we're planning down the line to have these modules. So we're going to look at what are the most common habits, which we know from the 2000s. It's often like exercise type stuff, sleep type stuff. And we'll be picking those most popular ones for the modules. Now this is also a question of marketing, right? So when someone comes to our webpage, when someone learns about Moti, how can they apply it to themselves and their habit? Because one of the great things is we see people delight a lot in when they think about, oh, I can use Moti for anything. So we see a big insurgence of like people who want to do meditation or more intellectual and creative type habits that right now the tech market is not like looking at them. Right. You can't get a Fitbit for practicing the guitar or practicing a new language, right? So how do we show these opportunities but still keep that customization that is so key and central?
Tobias and then Ailette, and I want to check in with you. Did you have a specific Caltrain that you were planning on jumping on?
No.
Are
I'm
you
just
sure?
taking the bar back.
You're okay? Are you all right? Okay. Tobias?
Two questions. One would be, are you planning to add additional sensors to this Moti as well? For example, like proximity sensors, ultrasonic or microphone? Because for example, like brushing your teeth, if the Moti would recognize, okay, now he was close to the Moti, now he started brushing teeth, and then like if he stops after 1 minute, it gets yellow, and after like 2 minutes, it gets green or something like that, when he's pushing it back.
Yeah, so with the sensors, we're not doing anything in terms of habit recognition, because that's going to be way too difficult to get right. There's going to be a lot of frustration, and we'll have to focus on specific habits. Now, what we are looking at are two things: adding an ambient light sensor. So our feedback from the beta, those lights, if it's in a lit room versus a dark room, they can be really annoying and frustrating. So that's one thing. And then also a proximity sensor, as you mentioned. So again, that walk through the door moment, that's really important. Moti can then light up and acknowledge your presence and say either, hey, good job, you did it, or hey, remember me. You know, right now the chirps and the reminders are random. But that said, we are pricing extremely competitively. So when I talk to the engineers at Highway 1, they're very concerned about adding any more parts. So we're going to have to really do some analysis on what's worth it at this point.
Okay. And you understand why, right? You don't want to over-feature. This, you know, the worst thing you can do is have feature creep right now, right?
Yeah, but I think like the proximity sensor will add a significant amount of human being into this Moti, because it more interacts with you, right? It makes it not more intelligent, as you said. But
so a way around that we're thinking about is, can we use location data from your phone to basically know whether you're at home or not? We won't know as much if you're like right in front of the device, but can we save those pennies on the electronic side that actually add up a lot with our COGS, and then do it in a purely software way?
No. Islet next. No, Islet, go for it.
Sorry. Okay, I have a different kind of question, because we were talking before about not getting attached to your ideas.
Yes.
And you were mentioning before that you had a few ideas and you had to choose one. This is the Moti, and you went forward with that. So what happened to the other ideas?
So you saw the wearable that I also prototyped in parallel with that one, and then quickly nixed because of this engineering complexity that was unnecessary. The other ideas were more, I mean, I wouldn't say they were app-based, but it was more around the planning and then getting people to learn and educate themselves about the process, which like really didn't have that much impact. So those, I mean, they were tests, and then I moved forward with them. So there's nothing going on with them there other than the fact that they were still all based in the science, so they still hold similar values. So the way that we set up the setup process with the Moti is harkening back to some of those old prototypes that I had when I was walking them through their habit loop and explaining that.
And let me draw a distinction, because Islet raises a very important question. I want to make sure you guys get this, right? The golden circle, the power of why, the purpose-led organization. People are very much attached to the why, right? You stand for something. You want to have an outcome. You want to cure cancer. You want to eliminate hunger. You want to help people improve their life and help them form healthy habits. So you care about the why. What you're less attached to is the how and the what. Okay? The how and the what are where you do iterations in the market to figure out how to get to delivering against the why. So, for example, most of you, we know Slack, right? Know the company Slack, right? The CEO of Slack's purpose in life is around radical transparency. He stands for radical transparency. And he's created a how and a why to get to radical transparency. The people that run WeWork have a unique background. One comes from your country. They grew up on a kibbutz. The other one was brought up in a collective, and they care very much about collaboration. So their why is about intensive collaboration. They believe the world should be an infinitely more collaborative place. And the way they figured it out was through a real estate rental model, but a very uniquely applied real estate, right? So very clearly, it's not that you don't care about the why, you care deeply. How you get there is much more malleable, and that's where there's a lot less attachment. So I'm going to go to Romulo, and I know that Patrick had his hand up, and then Shreya, and then I go to the back row. All right, go for it. Okay, I'm coming back this way, okay? And I'll come back this way.
Talk a little bit, this challenge is a big challenge we're doing. We've had a lot of competition in these different startups. So could you tell us, share with us your best practices in Moti that make you achieve being mentioned fast company so early, in accelerator here in San Francisco, data engineering monthly. Share with us your best practice.
I think it's probably less of a best practice and more about our story. So that's what got us the best article. So a little bit about how we got that. A person I worked with at Design for America, knew a writer Fasco who'd written about DFA before. She connected me over email. I said, hey, I would love to be a source for you. So rather than being like, here's Moti, like shove it down your throat, it was more, you're a journalist, you're a searching for stories, let me help you. Here's 3 things that I think are interesting that you could write. Either me and my story with my dual background, me at 30 weeks, and then I'm also working on this thing called Moti, and she picked Moti because it's a really great story, because we're doing something different that isn't in the fad of wearables and is based off of research and is thinking about it in new ways. So that I think is just the biggest thing is how is your product different and how does it stand out and also have the story behind it. So the fact that I can show them photos of that koala bear and that makes people really smile and they kind of see the progression of it and that kind of thing. In terms of I think the other best practice is about fundamentally believing in your product, which is hard sometimes to do in terms of best practice, but for me that comes from the user engagement. So I am able to say this is the stories that we're hearing from our users, and I personally feel like yes, we are doing something good for them, and this is helping them with their lives.
Let me give you a different answer because she's too humble to say this, so I'm going to have to say this for her. So I was running Startup Next in Boston, and I went to a local hardware VC from Bolt VC, and I said, I'd love to bring in someone who has design thinking experience within the world of hardware, and I wanted to complement that with people with hardware. He recommended you. Okay. Now, everything Kayla has done up until Moti leads exactly to Moti. Okay. She's a young woman who's playing on her dining room table with all kinds of physical stuff to program. Okay. This is her core. This is part of her DNA. So she loves this stuff, right? Long before she decided what she wanted to do as a grown-up, this is what she's done. She goes to a prestigious university. She decides to study engineering and art, right? The ultimate combination, complementary combination of left brain and right brain thinking, okay? She falls in love with design thinking. She makes that sort of her passion, okay? Everything we've talked about in this class, design thinking is at the core of every great business model. So you see the care. Now she could have taken you through a much more detailed presentation, which I've seen. You see the rigor and the care that went in every step along the way. All of these variations of the MVP, right? So it's everything we've talked about. It's lean startup. It's intensive, iterative, open-minded, humble user interaction. Okay, it's going to the best accelerator, pre-accelerator, one of the best for someone with her background. So it's all best practices. Every goddamn step has been a best practice, okay? Period. And truly. So I meet a lot of young entrepreneurs. I meet 150, 200 a year that I work with, right? This is as impressive, if I may say, as any I've seen, okay? And this young woman is a role model. And to have done what she did with getting it to where it was by herself is pretty amazing, okay? But this, you have to understand, right? It used to be that people like Kayla did not start up. People like Kayla went to Goldman Sachs or McKinsey. Okay? Yes, exactly. That's what I love about your generation, is that you say, ooh, okay? But it used to be the best and the brightest of this generation, and prior generations, did not go build useful stuff. But today, the best and the brightest are coming to Silicon Valley by the boatload, or they're going to New York, or Boston, or London, or Berlin. The level of requirements to succeed has grown by orders of magnitude. Okay? If you want to play in the Premier League or the Championship League, you got to come up through the ranks. Okay? The level of competition is far higher. So you don't make it if you don't use best practices. This doesn't happen by accident, okay? And the best team, what did we say? It's team, okay? Now, beyond all that, yes, now there's an awesome story because there's been a lot of thought around the story. But she had to build the platform to tell the story, okay? Cool. So where are we in this? Yes, Patrick.
Yeah, so we were talking, we've listed like 30 different possible or scenarios or alternatives you use
Yeah.
this. Is there a habit that you found in your testing so far that's been like above, like it sounds like exercise, like going for a run, or fitness is quite obviously a trending topic. Is that one, or is it drinking water? And if so, in terms of executing this as a business plan, have you thought about strategic partnerships with people like Nike or people like Evian or something like that? Or is your aim to keep it more general and not kind of sell out, I guess, by going just down one route?
Yeah. So with the beta, we were strategic about testing out different ones, and I don't think we had enough of one to be able to compare that to a group of another one.
Yeah.
But what we found is that, which was also a hypothesis, is like habits that are daily and or multiple times per day are better. Even like every other day, like you're good. But if it's a once a week thing, absolutely no. And we specifically picked for that kind of knowing the best practices there. And then in terms of focusing in on the most popular ones, I'd say, I'm trying to remember what it is, like at least 25% are exercise related from that big 2000 group. So that's a huge one, right? Now that said, if we were to partner with Nike, the problem is like all of a sudden now we're zooming in and we need to be the #1 experts on exercise. Whereas for us, our core competency is about habit formation from the behavioral science and the social robotics element, so it's more on a generalized space. But as we've talked about before, in terms of marketing, in terms of making sure people understand how to use Moti, we still need to pick those, like what are the most popular scenarios.
And so, again, a perfect strategic partnership would be, I want to quit smoking, there's a partnership with the American Cancer Society, and there's some kind of subsidized, opportunity, there may be some distribution, it may be sold through their website, so that would be something
This is
that would make
also
a
a
lot of sense.
timeline thing, so
Yeah.
our focus right now is on making Moti a trusted brand.
Yeah.
So we're doing that with our first more generalized product. Now, once we gain credibility and we become more of the household name, like, oh yeah, these guys know habit formation and the science, then, we have the thing for everyone, now we start specializing, now we start making those partnerships.
All right, Alice, Francesco, and Kel, okay? And then we're gonna start to wind this down, okay? And I'll come back to you, all right? Yeah.
I really admire you as a young woman entrepreneur, and I have a question, basically a psychological question. First of all, did you have any? I think Mike mentioned that you had some mentors. So.
Well, during the accelerator she did, yeah.
During the accelerator.
And she mentioned the one at the SG Johnson.
Okay.
That was her
but
employer.
But from the beginning, you were just by yourself.
Yeah.
Okay. So then, when you had some moments of doubt, who was your support? And that's the first question, and then the second question, if you really strongly believe in your product, and I think you're doing great so far, and you can just start selling the product, do you really need funding? Do you really need to raise capital, or you can just start selling the product and then raise step by step instead of diluting your stuff?
Got it. So talking about the mentor ones at first, I've always had people in my life who have not necessarily mentored me, but cheerleaded me along the way. So it was that professor at Yale in engineering. It was my manager at SC Johnson. So I've had, they help me with my confidence levels, I'd say. And then specifically to Moti, yeah, I had mentors in 30 weeks. But when things were going down, what was better than the mentors, it was my peers. So other people who were starting companies who were going through the same things. So that's who I turned to, because I didn't have a co-founder. I often joked at 30 weeks that either I need to find a co-founder or find a boyfriend.
Ideally not both at the same time.
The randomest crap and just complain to and whatever. All of that. And so, that said, I still don't have either one of those things. So
you keep working this hard, you're not gonna have a boyfriend for a while. Right?
Yeah.
Exactly.
I'm married to Moti, as you say.
Exactly.
And what I find is that it's the team members that I bring on now also, that even though they're not co-founders per se, they're the people that I lean on every day.
Yeah.
As well as whenever I need to reach out, I know I can reach out to say my co-manager and my parents, to be perfectly honest.
Cool.
Who are my number one supporters.
Cool. Francesco.
And about the funding.
Oh, right.
Yeah.
So funding, remind me what that was.
Oh, she was wondering if you had to raise money.
Oh, right. Yes. So with hardware, there's bigger overhead. So for instance, before we can have a product, we need to spend tens of thousands of dollars on tooling in order to injection mold at a mass manufacturing scale. So we can do pre-orders. That's my backup plan is like, at a certain point, we're gonna run out of runway, and if we don't have investment, like, quick, put a Kickstarter together, go, like sell to the 2000 or something like that. But in the early stage, before you're at super mass manufacturing, being able to leverage economies of scale, you know, you aren't gonna make as much of that profit margin that's gonna support the engineering team that you need, a tooling overhead at the beginning, all of these different types of things.
Yes, you understand, this is a hardware company. Hardware company as components. You have a bill of materials, you have a cost of goods, and then you have the manufacturing process, and you outsource manufacturing. And so there's capital, right? Software is theoretically free. Once you pay your engineers, the marginal cost is zero. But every time you build a new product, there is a cost associated with it. So it's a very different business, okay? Okay, Calvin? Yeah.
Recently I just finished reading a book, and so it was really interesting to see someone put this kind of methodology of building a habit-forming product into practice. And so I'm curious, with all these different kind of methods to use, like design thinking, human-centered design, hooked, and how did you prioritize, like, when you're developing the product, you know, I'm thinking about the trigger and the reward and the investment, and then going into design thinking and human-centered design. No, I need to test this, and vice versa. So it's kind of a pull from all these different.
Well, so HCD and design thinking to me, it's so ingrained in my core at the process level that it's not something that I have to think about. I just do, and that's how you develop a product. And so that's probably unique to me. So for you guys, it's more about like, that's how you lay out your process. And then when you dive into the actual product, that's when the things like hooked and nudge theory and all these different theories come in. And for me, what happened was that some of it was actually make those low fidelity things, put it in there, learn what sticks, and then investigate why is that sticking. So I had this overarching higher level thing about habit loop theory. That was the really big thing. So it's like trigger, routine, reward. Super simple. You need all three for a habit. Most people don't get three because it's delayed gratification. So how do you integrate a reward? So of course that was the push button, happy noise, cute thing. The cute thing was, quite frankly, because I had it on my table. And it was only after I put it into people's hands that I was like, oh, whoa, there's something here. Let's go learn about social robotics and like talk to people there. So it was a little bit of back and forth. I presented a very nice, picturesque story of it, but in reality, there's more spiraling.
Just a little bit of coaching. One way to find time for boyfriend is to read less about social robotics, okay? Okay, Francesco, go for it.
What is this early stage industry of devices that track and interact with the behavior of human being? But which expectation do you have for the future of this industry? In particular, Moody's have a soft approach with the usual. Would you make some other solutions from competitors that would have an approach not so much soft as the Moody's one?
So this is tangential, what I'm going to say, but a really interesting thing that we're thinking about right now is like, where would Moti live on a retail shelf? Right. Would it live next to Fitbit? Would it live next to Nest and Smart Connected Home? For me, Moti theoretically should live next to your yoga mats, your self-help books, your Fitbits, your anything, any tools that you would do for habit formation. So we're kind of in this weird position where we're defining a slightly new type of product and don't know where it fits.
You're creating a category.
And so you were also asking about, you know, were you talking about more like adding more complexity and less soft to it?
In a broader point of view, the future of the industry. For example, would the image competitor to have to launch devices that are a little bit more invasive than yours?
I can't say right now. I will be able to say once we get feedback from our pilot and our launch.
You already know. All right, we're going to do a couple more. Sharier. Okay, then Terrence and then Mohammed, okay. And then we're going to wrap it up, okay? We're going to have to wrap it up. We've been going way beyond budget, okay? I think almost every one of you has asked at least one question. I've got people coming back for their second question now. Okay? All right, go for it.
I wanted to ask about product life cycle, your idea about the product life cycle, and also what will happen after the user's habit is somehow fixed? Are you trying to making the use of Moti some kind of a habit itself?
Yeah, well, that's the funny thing is what we heard from our users.
Did everybody hear the question? He asked about, first of all, product life cycle. Part one, everybody sneaks in at least 2 questions, okay? Can we form a habit about only asking 1 question? Okay, 1 question, man. Okay.
Wait, where was I going with this?
All right, so if you want to know about life cycle.
Life cycle.
Yeah.
I had this great
Oh,
answer
shit,
for
I'm
the
sorry.
second part of it. Can
All
you
right.
give me some keywords to go off of?
The second one? The second
What
one
happens
is
after
about
once
what
it-
What happens after?
What
Yeah,
happens
habit is
afterwards?
What happens?
After the habit is fixed, are you trying to make it habit using the?
Oh yeah, the habit using the device. So that's a really interesting thing. What we saw with our data is people would complain that with an app or like even a wearable where you have to charge it, you have to build more habits for your habit tool. People don't see Moti as having to build a habit even though they are, because it's so dead simple and it's right in front of them. Like you do the thing, you're reminded. You do the thing, you push the button, you get the celebration. They're not even bothering logging in online because it's too many steps, quite frankly. And getting your phone and being like, oh, here's my phone. Push the button, like push my Touch ID, get to the home screen, swipe to the app, get into the app. That is a habit that you have to do because it's too much friction, right? So that was the first thing I wanted to address. And then you talk about product life cycle. We do, like, the way we talk about it is, yeah, form your habit, Moti knows, use it for a new habit. But as we've been seeing, like, that may not be as emotionally available for some people. So I don't think we're far enough in testing. Like, our beta users have used it for a month to 1.5 months. So we haven't gotten to the point yet of where they're exiting their habit, but most people talk about using it for a new thing.
All right, Terrence, Mohammed, and then I'm going to go, tell me your name. I can't read, I'm sorry, I'm blind. Johanna, and Johanna, and now we're done, okay? I'm sorry. This is it. We gotta just, because I want you guys to go work on your VOD plans too, right? Remember those? Yeah. All right, go for it.
Yeah, I've been experimenting with a lot of if this, then that recipes, and I've come up with my own acronym, which if this, then what, right? Because seriously, you smoke it all, drunk it all, exercise, yeah, it takes about, say about 4 months to get into a habit. And Gretchen Rubin in the Better Than Before, New York bestseller said, listen, you got to define between a goal and a habit. Because after you reach the goal, you jump on to the next goal, and 2 months down the line, you're worse than before. So how do you define the fine line between your goal and a habit?
Yeah.
And very similar to that question, exactly.
Once
you reach that habit, then what?
So I'll do the first part. With Moti, so this is also part of the science behind it, is that how do you set up a habit with Moti? You need specific things that are goals, essentially. So you have goals that build up to habits. So this is what is the action, and then what is the frequency. So it has to be something that's countable, which means that it's discrete, which is really important. Most people are very abstract with their habits and don't put them into actionable ways. And then this is also basically like what days per week, if you have off days, because weekends and weekdays are very different routines. You may not be waking up at 6 a.m. on the weekends, which is okay. And then it's also like, do you have existing times during the day that you want to attach this to? So the best thing is to attach a new habit to an existing routine. So we ask you for target times, and whether these are deadlines or more just expectations. So really, if you think about it in a single day, this is your goal. And then if you put together multiple days of goals, that builds into a habit.
Mohammed?
Right. First, I like the simplicity, one button, one Moti, one habit. It's very focused, and it's a genius idea, and I agree it's the beauty of the product. But do you think that Moti can improve, can be improved and have other ways of interacting, like more than a button, and have more artificial intelligence behind, like introducing cognitive computing? Now, Moti can only say, okay, you did your habits, you did yes or no, so it's a binary. But he can propose to adjust your habits if Moti knows you, with machine learning or things. He can propose something. He can give you advices for your habits.
Yeah. So the basic answer is yes.
What is the limits? Yeah. What is the limit
the
of that?
limits are more about what is the human attention span and what's going to be ignored versus annoyed. So similar to those app push notifications, we're very wary of that. So we're always asking ourselves, what's the minimal, most simple thing we can do to get the efficacy. And so what we learned with our beta is a lot of people do ask for that app functionality. Some people, the likes and physicality reminders enough. Some people, they want, you know, if it goes through the stages, that we have different stages of reminders, and if it gets to the last one, then they get a text message. So that's one thing. Now, the big thing we're going to be focusing on, which we haven't yet, is what happens when you aren't doing really well at your habit. This is, like you said, suggestions for improvement. Maybe you need to change your habit, change some of the settings. It might suggest these. Or just not do your habit right now and set a new start date for when your life is a little bit less crazy. So I completely agree. We haven't looked into too much detail, but it's definitely going to be integrated into the pilot.
Johanna?
Now that you said that at the beginning you have like a lot of options because you were creating them at home, and now that you want to do the mass production, you are going to reduce those. Have you thought about either mass customization, like go to the webpage and I create it and I wait for my thing for, I don't know, 1 to 2 weeks, or create something like, for example, work for product for kids that I can paint the thing or create. Like, I don't know if you know these little doll that kids can like paint and they can build it like from
like
nothing
Nike
to a
ID.
monkey or something else like that. To create like more attachment to it.
So we're always balancing between the attachment and customization versus like pristine designed object that's a premium thing. And so from our perspective, we want to help control the design and make sure that it is that premium product. So we aren't letting people make as many choices earlier on. I think that like one thing we're thinking about is if you notice there's like a Moti that has little feet, a Moti that has little ears, there's one that has little arm nubs. You might say, okay, here's the base body, and then you can attach these different ones and pick which one, but you only get one.
Right.
So it's not like you don't want to get too much symbolic association with the form of it, since it should be with the habit, but you still need to get that emotional connection. So it's these fine lines that we're walking. This is also really driven by our manufacturing. So to have multiple SKUs means multiple tooling costs, which means a ton more money. Also, the shape of the design impacts the tooling costs. So the sphere is a lot more expensive to create than the like dome one. So this is a lot of what we're thinking about with Highway 1, and it's why we're starting small at first to make sure that we can be profitable, and then expand more down the line.
So hopefully what you take away, there's many things to take away, but the choices, the infinite number of choices that you face as an entrepreneur with a early validated solution can be overwhelming, right? Absolutely overwhelming, right? And so this is one of the biggest challenges that entrepreneurs face is where do we start to focus from here? And when you're manufacturing something versus developing software, as you said very well, right, every incremental addition is additional cost. And at this early juncture, that means you're raising money when you don't have a lot of market validation, you're giving up more and more of your company. So there's a much higher level of dilution that you wind up facing as well, right? So these are difficult choices, guys, right? Really very difficult choices. So I want to ask, since you've been so generous, you gave us 2 hours on a Saturday, we've just been in town, is there anything, because we are here, your target, many of these people are your persona. Is there anything we can do to help you, a survey or something that would give you some insight into the next level of questions or discovery?
Definitely.
So how can we help you?
So the first thing is, for us with traction, like I don't even know how many people are in the room.
There's about 70, 72 right
Yeah,
now.
if all of you were to go and sign up for our mailing list and follow us on Twitter, we get like an instant boost. So that'd be great. And the way to do that is go to moti.io. There's a button. I will not be offended if you look at your computers right now. You can either
They do it to me all the time,
get
don't worry.
Moti page or scroll all the way down to sign up on our mailing list. And then our Twitter handle is @habitmoti. And so that's the first thing to appreciate. Now the second thing is, I don't know how long you guys are in San Francisco for, but we are going to be developing what we're calling Moti Labs. So this is a group of local folks who are willing to come into the Highway 1 office, for an afternoon, weekend, evening, something like that, where we're running through tests. So similar to those lights I showed you, where it's like one-off testing rather than long-term. We're going to be doing that with different, really testing out, the implications of different manufacturing techniques on the design and interaction. So that's one way that you guys can help
So
out as well.
how many of you will be here after graduation? You will be in San Francisco, okay? So let me encourage you, if you, again, go back to Romula's question about best practices, right? You're here to study disruptive innovation. Go visit Moti Labs and go see how it's done. Right? What an awesome way to continue the learning of this course when this course is open. Okay?
So we'll be sending out an email to the general mailing list with a call to anyone who's in the San Francisco area to sign up there. There'll be a survey. You can also, there's a potential we'll open up some of the pilot to direct to consumer, and we're pulling that list from the people who apply for our data, and you can apply through the Get Moti tab, and that's going to be also survey information to get basically what I've said, the demographics, your habits, etc. like that. If you want to be considered for that pilot, it can be more of a random draw.
Cool. All right, so would you rather just wait for people to sign up, or would you rather I just give you the email list of this?
Let's do both.
Okay. Does anybody object if I was to give Kayla your whole email address? Does anybody object? If you do, you let me know offline, okay? But again, you have a lot going on. You have been extremely generous with your time. I had told everybody how impressed they would be. I'm pretty sure that I speak for all of them, as I saw a lot of heads nodding. It's always a pleasure. I always learn stuff every time I have you in my classroom. Thank you so much.